Today we're heading to Tongariro National Park for an epic circuit of one of New Zealand's most iconic landscapes. Let's talk about the Tongariro Northern Circuit and around the mountain track. Kia ora and welcome to The Tramping Life, a podcast about hiking in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or as we call it here, tramping. I'm Chauncey, and in this episode I'll talk about a specific track or hut. I'll give an overview and share my experience, along with the highlights and some practical advice. Tongariro National Park is New Zealand's oldest national park, established in 1887. It sits in the central North Island and covers nearly 800 square kilometres. At its core are three active or recently active volcanoes. The 2,797-metre Mount Ruapehu, which is the highest peak in the North Island, 2,291-metre Mount Ngauruhoe, which is a near-perfect cone, it was the model for Mount Doom in the Lord of the Rings films, and Mount Tongariro, 1,978 metres, is a complex volcanic massif rather than a single peak. The landscape is geologically young and dynamic. Ruapehu last erupted in 2007 and Ngauruhoe last erupted in 1977. Tongariro is not simply a wilderness area, it's a landscape of deep spiritual importance to local iwi. In 1990, the park became a dual World Heritage Site, recognised by UNESCO for both its natural and cultural values, one of the first places globally to receive that dual designation. The Tongariro Northern Circuit is one of New Zealand's great walks. It's a 43-kilometre loop around Mount Ngauruhoe, walked over 2 to 4 days, which includes a large part of the Tongariro Alpine Crossing. I've talked about this and the other great walks in detail on the Amateur Traveller podcast. Just search for New Zealand Great Walks on your podcast app and you should find it. The Around the Mountain track is a 66-kilometre circuit of Mount Ruapehu, typically walked over 4 to 6 days. This is more challenging than the Northern Circuit, but is a suitable step up from Great Walks for those looking to build their tramping experience. It crosses the Rangipo Desert, the only desert in New Zealand, which sits in the rain shadow to the east of Mount Ruapehu. Combining the Northern Circuit Great Walk and Around the Mountain track creates a full loop of Tongariro National Park of approximately 82 kilometres, taking 6 to 7 days. It's a good option for those looking for a challenge without needing technical experience and is logistically straightforward as a loop from Whakapapa Village. I'll describe a 6-day option, which assumes travel on the first and last day to and from Whakapapa and some long days in between, but there are plenty of huts if you want to take longer. The timings I've used are docks. Day 1, Whakapapa to Mangatapopo Hut, 3 hours, 8.5 k. This is a relatively easy, if heavily eroded, track. The hut was built in 1974 and is the third hut on the site. Day 2, Mangatapopo Hut to Waihohonui Hut, 8k, 20 kilometres. The first part to Otariri Hut is 5 kilometres and 12k. This is the busiest section of the entire tramp, as it includes the Tongariro Alpine Crossing. It's best to start early to avoid the worst of the crowds before turning off to relative quiet past the Emerald Lakes. Otariri Hut was built in 1970 and is being replaced as of early 2026. From there to Waihohonui Hut, 3 hours and 8k, and then you've completed much of the Great Walk. Just missed the Tama Lakes. This hut was opened in 2010 and it was then one of the most expensive huts in the network, costing docks $750,000 for solar heating and lights and double glazing. A new hut on the Milford track recently opened cost $3 million. This 20-bunk hut is far larger than the Mangatapopo hut, which also has 20 bunks. Both have 2 bunk rooms, but there's way more space in this hut. On a 20-minute detour from the hut, you can visit the historic Waihohonui hut, built in 1903. Day 3, head on to Rangipo Hut. So this is 5 hours and 12.5 k, so one of the shorter days. The 20-bunk Rangipo Hut has a couple of bunk rooms again and some bunks in the main room. It has a particularly rocky path to the toilet, so take care at night, but it has expansive views across the Rangipo Desert. It was built in 1972 and it is showing its age despite recent painting by the Backcountry Trust. Day 4, Rangipo Hut to Blythe Hut, 8 hours and 14.5 kilometres. So Rangipo Hut to Mangauruhoe Hut, which is an 18-bunk serviced hut that's 5.5 hours and 8.5 k. This hut was built in 1969 and refurbished in late 1980. From there on to Lupton Hut, it's another couple of hours. Lupton Hut is owned by the Whanganui High School. This is a private but unlocked hut. If you do stay, then please pay the hut fees. Blythe Hut was built in the mid-1970s to replace the previous 1922 hut that burnt down. This is author Hazel Phillips' favourite hut in Tongariro National Park, which I would agree with. Day 5, Blythe Hut to Whakapapa Hut. Day 6, Whakapapa Hut to Whakapapa Village. Just 2.5 hours and 8.7k to finish the loop. If you're interested in the fascinating history of Tongariro National Park, I'd highly recommend Fire and Ice, Secrets, Histories, Treasures and Mysteries of Tongariro National Park by Hazel Phillips. I had a great chat with her for the podcast, which will be released later this year. I've tramped in Tongariro National Park a few times. I walked the Tongariro Alpine Crossing back in 2011, Tongariro Northern Circuit in 2014 and 2015, and around the mountain also in 2015. And I did this extended tramp around the entire park in 2023. It was a little scary how much I had forgotten or misremembered, but it made it a fresher experience. Things had changed in Whakapapa with the closure in February 2023 of Chateau Tongariro, a sad end for this near 100-year-old iconic New Zealand building. Tussock Bar and Restaurant was also shut, and the nearby ski fields had only recently been saved by a significant government loan. Heading to Mangatapopo Hut for the track was a little easier than I remembered, with a few small sections of bush, but as with most of Tongariro National Park, it's an open and exposed landscape, wonderful on a good day, not quite so much fun in steady rain that we had that day. I'd remembered how eroded the track often is, with plenty of marks from where people had slipped. Mangatapopo Hut was a welcome sight with not very environmentally friendly gas-powered heating and solar lighting, which was a new addition since my last visit. With the rain, the drying rack got good usage, and it was a cosy but manageable with 17 people in the 20-bunk hut, plus a couple of brave couples outside camping. Thankfully, the rain cleared overnight, but it was a cloudy start as I walked along most of the Tongariro Alpine Crossing. Staying in the hut gave me a head start on the daywalkers, who finally started to pass me in the South Crater. They weren't carrying a 22 kg pack. There are plenty of safety warnings, appropriate given the highly variable weather and often poorly equipped daywalkers. On average, 2 people a week are rescued off the crossing. There were definitely more toilets along the crossing than when I had first walked it 12 years before. Pre-COVID, up to 3,000 people a day would walk the Alpine Crossing. Thankfully, it was much quieter on the Sunday I walked it, seeing no one as I headed up the Devil's Staircase to the South Crater. The Red Crater was tough going, though, with strong cold winds, though the screed descent towards the famous Emerald Lakes seemed a lot easier than I remembered, and that was a good spot for lunch watching the daywalkers pass by. I definitely wasn't expecting to see a well-fed seagull about as far away from the sea as is possible in New Zealand. According to the warden at the next hut, the seagull has lived here for years, fed on the food left behind by daywalkers. From here, the Northern Circuit turns off from the Tongariro Alpine Crossing with a long and punishing downhill. At the bottom is a surreal landscape filled with colourful plants and unusually shaped giant rocks. Otariri Hut was a welcome spot for a rest before a final 3 hours hiking to Waihanui Hut. Despite tiredness, this is one of my favourite parts of the day. It was mostly out in the open with big views and relatively straightforward walking. Oddly, in the middle of these near desert-like conditions is a section of beech forest, which was beautiful in the fading light of the day. The 200-metre climb through it was a bit of a slog, though, and I could see Waihanui Hut long before reaching it. Day 3 was possibly my favourite day of the hike, with incredible views and landscapes. At dawn, sunrise lit up Mount Ruapehu, and Mount Ngauruhoe finally emerged from the clouds. Within half an hour, I was at Ohenini Pango Springs, where beautiful fast-flowing water emerges from under rocks. It was a bit of a slog along a sandy track, but after a short climb was one of my favourite views of the whole hike, with stunning landscapes below and a wonderful play of light on the landscape. The top of Mount Ruapehu popped out of the clouds, and a little further along the track I dropped down to a barren landscape, which was relatively flat but felt almost endless to cross. There was a hut-like structure in the distance, but it isn't a tramping hut, the giveaway being the huge radio masts. After a decent climb up, the last thing I was expecting to see was a camper van parked up. The track mostly followed the contours of the landscape, with quite epic views out towards Desert Road, another highlight of the hike, and the sights kept coming as the track dropped down to cross the first Laha, a channel which superheated volcanic steam has raced down 3 times in the past 50 years. There was a smell of sulphur in the air and snow on top of Mount Ruapehu in the distance. It was a bit of a slog, though, through increasingly poor weather to reach Rangipo Hut for the night. Day 4 was an epic, with a clear if cold start at Rangipo Hut as I left at sunrise for a long day walk into Blythe Hut. Patches of snow remain from significant snowfall the previous week, which nearly trapped a group at Rangipo Hut. It didn't take long to reach another huge Laha. The descent was steep but manageable, but looking back up, it seemed almost impossibly steep. The track headed through native beech forest with a fair amount of boardwalk, which gave my feet a pleasant break from the rocky surfaces that dominate the around the mountain track. More bushwalking followed, which normally isn't my favourite, but it made a welcome change from the rocks. Lupton Hut is probably the only hut I've visited with carpet on the floor, but it didn't seem very appealing, particularly when Blythe Hut was only a short walk away, and I had the place to myself, a slightly spooky treat. From here, I enjoyed one of the better sunrises I've seen, with good views near the hut of the landscape below and Mount Ruapehu above. The best view, though, was towards Mount Taranaki, about 200 kilometres away to the west, as the sky lit up with colour. This was quite spectacular and an almost exact inverse of the incredible sunset I saw from Syme Hut near the top of Mount Taranaki, looking back towards Mount Ruapehu in January 2021. Day one from Blythe Hut to Whakapapa Hut was one of the longest I've done, starting at sunrise and finishing a few hours after sunset. From Blythe Hut, I followed a pole-marked route behind the hut heading up the side of Mount Ruapehu towards Tarua ski field. The poles ended at the southeast basin, but from here it was a straightforward walk up to the ski field infrastructure and then onto Oakuni Mountain Road. The trickiest part was to come, descending the Cascades. These are a rocky, water-filled section, which I found super scary back in 2015. It was marginally easier now with more experience and poles, but in the wet this section would be incredibly dangerous. From here it was a short and easy walk to Mangataru Hut. This was the second time I've had lunch at this hut. It's a lovely spot with views of Mount Ruapehu ahead. From here, the track is straightforward and scenic, particularly passing by Lake Surprise, which does make a surprising appearance as you turn a corner on the boardwalk. As dusk fell, I spotted Whakapapa Hut in the distance, which from previous experience takes a lot longer to reach than hoped, particularly in the darkness, which soon enveloped me, although thankfully it was near full moon. The next section was one of the trickiest of the whole hike, with loose rocks, streams to cross, and endless up and down, all while searching out with my head torch for the next pole. I was a bit of a wreck by the time I reached the hut after 8 p.m. The sixth and final day was thankfully far easier, other than an unbridged crossing of the Whakapapa River, which can be impassable in heavy flow, but was manageable today. From here, there was plenty of boardwalk and easy bushwalking, which made a welcome change from most of the terrain over the past 6 days. I reached Whakapapa about lunchtime, looking forward to non-dehydrated food and not carrying a heavy pack, but filled with memories from an incredible near week in the wilderness. There were many highlights of this tramp, including the sense of accomplishment from doing a very long walk, exploring much of the incredible Tongariro National Park. Seeing Mount Ruapehu from different angles every day was a wonderful experience, and the landscape went from volcanic desert to tussock to thick native bush. It was great to visit 10 huts from the historic to the new, but all with character and views. Blythe Hut is probably the quietest and my favourite. The Rangipo Desert is a unique landscape and incredibly atmospheric, and sunsets and sunrises are often particularly good, helped by the open landscape of much of Tongariro National Park. To finish with a few bits of practical advice, book the huts. All the huts on this trip now need to be booked in advance, with the Great Walk huts being the most popular, although there is usually space at their campsites. Check the forecast and plan accordingly, noting that weather can change quickly and dramatically. Outside of summer and early autumn, alpine conditions prevail and suitable experience and gear is essential. Most of the track or route is rocky, so it can be a tough tramp on the boots. Gaiters can be useful for the scree sections, particularly coming down from the Red Crater to the Emerald Lakes. Contact the Dock Visitor Centre in Whakapapa in advance to get a parking permit so you can leave your car there for the duration of your tramp. And finally, this itinerary does include some long days, so assess your fitness and appetite for punishment and plan accordingly. The Mountain Safety Council have short videos on both the Northern Circuit and the Round the Mountain track on their website, which are well worth watching. Thank you so much for listening to The Tramping Life. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast in whatever app you use. Tell a friend about it and consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at thetrampinglife, one word, @gmail.com.